my early 2000s online tormentor. In the early 2000s, the online world was a vast, unexplored landscape full of mysteries. In my early teenage years, my best friend Junior and I found ourselves entangled in an online chat room situation. I now know it could have been so much worse than it was. We used to come back from school, log into Internet Explorer, and browse the chat rooms just for fun. We didn't know anything about internet safety yet, but we did have fake profiles. Our sense of humor was always strong, so we both decided it would be funny to create a fake name and profile. Dumb 13-year-olds having a little dumb fun. We browsed online and ended up on a chat room website called ChatUOL, BaitPapoUOL, a popular chat platform in Brazil, which used to be a famous chat platform in my country. One afternoon, Junior and I decided to prowl the virtual rooms claiming to be an older stewardess called Shirley, for absolutely no reason in particular. This detail is so nonsense that it stands out in my memory. We were just generally very curious about this newfound ability to connect to strangers, deciding to talk to as many people as possible. Among the countless usernames, one in particular caught our attention, something like Chatmaster, Mestre do Chat in Portuguese. We started a conversation, making up details about this fake woman we created. It was pretty funny for us young kids, but as time passed, this man gradually started revealing himself as a creep, shattering our naive enthusiasm. What used to be exciting now started to look dangerous. Chatmaster's seemingly harmless questions soon grew more invasive, asking forcefully about Shirley's personal life. He wanted to know about her job, her family, her looks, her underwear. Then it shifted to more mature questions, and we were downright spooked. He was clearly older and into some heavy stuff we didn't even understand. It felt forbidden, and I guess that was our intuition trying to protect us. Life went on. We eventually logged back into that website to talk some more and have a few laughs. Chatmaster would always be in a specific online room, almost like he was keeping an eye on Shirley. One night, we were having a slumber party at my house, but the conversation between him and Shirley was getting too graphic on his part. We decided to log off and change websites for good. That was when I received a private email on my personal account, which was generally empty. I don't recall the exact wording, but I remember the shivers down my spine. It was an email from Chatmaster calling us by our real names and asking about our real hometowns. Panic went like ice through our veins. We started to realize the gravity of the situation. We had never seen anything like that before. Back then, we felt like this kind of specific information about someone was impossible to get, and couldn't understand how this man possibly found out who and where we were. Terrified, we promised to disconnect from the chat forever, severing all ties with Chatmaster and other strangers. However, the haunting sense of being watched, of never truly being alone, clung to us like a sinister presence. We couldn't even tell our parents, since they would for sure blame it on us and likely ground us for talking to strangers. Days or weeks passed. I got a second message from the same Chatmaster email, pretty much the same as the first one, mentioning our real information and asking for more contact. I got a few of these, and they were all the same, but the guy somehow found out the name of our school as well. My skin prickled every time I thought of this strange man finding my house. It was clear that the guy was middle-aged and deeply disturbed, not only because of his disgusting topics of conversation, but also the daunting emails. Who does that to a couple of innocent children? It's not like he thought we were Shirley, or that we were being brats. We just made up stuff and got spooked. This asshole had no right to terrify us the way he did. I remember a lot of time going by, perhaps months. Junior and I kept away from these chat rooms since then, avoiding the subject at all costs. I got to the point of sometimes crying myself to sleep imagining this chatmaster guy breaking into my house and attacking me or something. It was a very stressful situation for a 13-year-old who didn't know anything about this online tormentor or how to keep safe. Thankfully, the emails eventually stopped, and I was able to forget about this dude. I also learned a bit more about this kind of IP search and decided to believe that Chatmaster was only trying to scare us, not actually hunt us down. Nowadays, I know I should have contacted a grown-up about this, but back then I used to be the good girl and didn't want to get into trouble. I also didn't know how to delete my email account and probably didn't even know it was possible. I know the ending of this story can be underwhelming, but the sheer anxiety of not knowing if someone's going to grab you in your own room is so eerie. When we're young, the creepiness of strangers seems to live within our bones for longer. Since then, Junior and I have gotten into some other online situations, but none as scary as this. So stay safe and make sure to teach children about online stranger danger. Hotel break-in. So to put this in perspective, I was going to meet my ex-girlfriend back in February 2022. We booked a travel lodge and we were excited to see each other. We were put on the second floor right at the end of the hallway. I had a view of the cinema that was outside of the hotel so I could see everything and everyone. But one man caught my attention. He was wearing black jeans and a black shirt. He had brown hair and a pair of reading glasses in his shirt pocket. He looked to be in his late 30s to early 40s. As I was looking down upon this man, he looked up and his eyes met mine. He did nothing for what felt like 10 years, but in reality was 2 seconds until I realized he was looking at me with a demonic and abnormal smile. I moved away from that window and closed the curtains for a few seconds. I built up the confidence to peek around the curtain to see him gone. He disappeared. I felt a ton of weight come off of my shoulders. I thought that it was done. I was hoping I'd never see the guy again, but I was wrong. Me and my girlfriend at the time went out for food, got some snacks and drinks, and headed back to the room. Hours passed and I was talking at 2 to 3 a.m. and I heard pounding at the doors next to us. I was confused. Did the person knocking have any idea that people were trying to sleep? As terrified as I was, I decided to look impressive in front of my girlfriend at the time and slowly approached the door. I put my head to the door to listen. I could hear footsteps walking down the hallway. I slowly turned back around and was about to open my mouth to say we're all good, go to sleep, until my pocket got stuck on the door handle. It rattled the door, and as it happened I heard thunderous footsteps approach our door. My girlfriend was sobbing at this point. I did what anyone would do in this situation and I checked the peephole. It was the biggest mistake of my life. There he was grinning at me, staring straight back at me. His hair was messy like he had been electrocuted, and he was breathing heavily. My heart dropped into my stomach as I heard the door handle rattle. I said in a panic, "Hey man, you have the wrong room." And he said back to me, "No, I don't. Open up before I do it for you." I stumbled backward. I went and locked the door, consoled my girlfriend who was in a panic and crying. I shouted, "Leave us alone," and surprisingly the rattling stopped. He walked away. I got into bed and tried to stay awake, but I failed. I woke up the next morning and what I saw chills me to the core to this day. My bag was emptied everywhere. The room had a smell of cigarettes and body odor, and on the desk there was a napkin that had a note written on it. It said, "You should let me in next time." I told my girlfriend to pack and that we were leaving. We left the hotel immediately and went to the train station. My question is, how did he get in the room when it was locked and you needed a keycard to get in? And how did he sneak past the front desk? It's a story that will scar me for life. The boy at the bus stop. The car's engine revved as I sped down the road. I was lost in thought and hardly took notice of the rain crashing against my windshield. Nature seemed to sense my anger. The storm was rising. I poured more vodka down my throat, my eyes constantly darting to the shiny black handgun lying on the passenger seat. Brushing the cold metal with the tip of my fingers, my mind involuntarily flooded with images of my oldest daughter, Mara. Her entire life played through my mind in mere seconds. My last memory of Mara was from when I had to identify her body in the morgue. My hands began to shake. An uncontrollable tremor spread through my body. I pulled over the car, unable to continue, and slammed my fist against the steering wheel. The images of the morgue would not leave me. I closed my eyes. There she was, lying on a metal table. A blanket had been carefully draped over her body, only revealing her pale face. She had just turned 16. Death seemed to have aged her well beyond that. The pathologist placed his hand on my shoulder. I had not been able to comprehend any of his words. The man's actions had seemed so forced and well-practiced it only angered me more. I had asked for a moment alone. After the doctor left, I hesitantly placed my hand on my daughter's cheek. Almost instantly, I pulled it back. She had felt so cold. I stared at her lower abdomen where I knew the knife had pierced her. For a fraction of a second, I contemplated pulling away the blanket and exposing the wound. But I could not muster the strength. She looked peaceful now, as if she was sleeping. I feared exposing the wound that had killed her would somehow change that. That had been a little over a month ago. The police quickly caught the youth who committed the crime. Some bum who'd attempted to rob her and wielded his knife a little too over-enthusiastically. He had murdered her, although she had given him her purse. I punched the wheel again. It wasn't fair. The youth's trial was yesterday. He'd been acquitted on account of procedural mistakes by the police. The man had smiled at me as they led him out of the courtroom. It wasn't fair. That bum had destroyed my life at an astounding rate. My wife could barely stand to look at me anymore. A week ago, she moved out of the house and took our youngest daughter with her. She told me I needed help. She said she couldn't watch me ruin my life. I didn't blame her. This past month I found solace in liquor. I could not let go of my pain. It festered into an uncontrollable rage. All I could think about was the injustice of it all. All I could see was the pale face of my dead daughter. All I wanted was to kill the man responsible. It became an obsession. I had been unable to console my wife. My youngest daughter had practically not spoken since the loss of her sister. I found her quietly curled up in Mara's bed most days. Unable to let go. Unable to move on. It broke my heart. I had felt a strange sense of relief watching them both drive off. I did not need them to see what happened next. I did not want my youngest daughter to witness her dad being dragged away for murder. I preferred the solitude and the warm embrace of alcohol. My eyes darted back towards the gun and I sighed. I had to do this. Otherwise, I would never know peace. Determined, I turned the ignition key. The car purred gently before reverting into stillness. I turned the key again. Nothing happened. I cursed loudly and tried again. Nothing. I took out my frustration on the steering wheel until both my hands ached. I grabbed my phone ready to call a tow truck, but it would not switch on. The wind howled outside. I checked my wristwatch, but the handles had stopped moving. Everything seemed in suspension. After a short internal debate, I decided. The thought of remaining in the car suddenly seemed unbearable. Feeling restless, I kicked open the door and got out of the car, hastily stuffing the phone in my jacket pocket. The storm was livid. Rain poured with such force it temporarily deafened all other thoughts coursing through my mind. I was drenched within a second, but it didn't bother me. I started walking down the road, crossing a little bridge across a river. Mumbled curses escaped my mouth as I realized I was lost. A cold mist lazily enveloped me. Not knowing what else to do, I continued walking until a distant light pierced through the gray veil. Like a moth, I gravitated towards it. Its source is a small bus stop. Relieved to have found some cover, I fell back into one of the metal seats. My hands felt numb. I rubbed them together for a couple of moments before reaching into my pocket for my pack of cigarettes. After taking a long drag, I closed my eyes and leaned back against the bus stop. Slowly, I blew out a cloud of smoke and the tremor subsided. Without instruction, my mind drifted back toward the youth who'd killed my daughter. A familiar doubt fell over me. I had always valued human life. As a family man, I'd constantly tried to maximize everyone's happiness. Now here I was, committed to blowing a hole in the head of my daughter's murderer. I turned around and looked at my reflection in the glass. I could no longer recognize the pale, lined face staring back at me. Droplets of rain slowly slid down the glass. It gave my reflection even more of a somber appearance. I looked back out in front of me and took another drag from the clammy cigarette stuck between my fingers. Closing my eyes, I exhaled, expelling another cloud of smoke. The voice startled me. Rough day? The cigarette slipped from my grasp and fell down my shirt. I jumped up swearing as ash scorched my chest. Jesus Christ, I muttered at the young boy standing before me. The boy grinned. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to startle you. I shrugged and sat back down. The boy took a seat beside me. It holds a strange beauty, doesn't it? I glanced at him. What does? He nodded out at the storm. There was a silence. I broke it by standing and pacing up and down the little bus stop. When is the goddamn bus going to get here? The boy gave me an appraising look. I'm afraid no bus can take you to where you want to go, John. I absent-mindedly shrugged off his words and lit another cigarette. After my first drag, it hit me. I stared at the boy. He stared back. A latent intensity burned in his eyes. How do you know my name? I know a great many things. I snorted. Sure. I know the pain you feel, John. I have seen it before. Many times. I crushed the pack of cigarettes in my hand, feeling a fresh wave of anger crash over me. You don't know me. The boy gave me a sad smile. I have seen this before. Someone loses someone close to them. As a result, you feel rage build deep inside of you. Fueled by guilt because you weren't able to prevent what happened. Unable to see that it was beyond your control to begin with. You could never have changed what happened, yet you cannot forgive yourself either. The mind cruelly tortures the body until your heart is riddled with sorrow. Now your existence is anguish. You wish you had been the one to die because the thought of living on just seems too difficult. Living in this world does not seem bearable at the sight of such a loss. I remained speechless, unable to comprehend the little boy beside me. The boy sighed and scratched the back of his head. I've seen this before. After a while, it all begins to look the same. The faces may change, but emotion remains constant. Your face is lined as so many before you. A canvas of hate and anger. The boy sighed again and jumped to his feet. Murder will not bring her back. I spun towards the boy. What did you say? Mara is gone. Murder won't bring her back. The boy spoke the words so casually that it took me a moment to register them. Then, before I could stop myself, I slammed the boy against the glass wall. The entire bus stop trembled. Don't you say that name, I shouted. Tears began streaming down my face. Don't say it. The boy stared at me with a blank expression. He put his hand around mine and slowly pulled loose from my grip. His fingers are hard as iron. I feel for you. I really do. Your daughter deserved better. I know you think revenge will dull the pain. That somehow using that thing in your pocket will make you feel better. I fished out the gun. The boy stared at it. Something dark swept across his face. He briefly held out his hand before suddenly retracting it, as if the gun had electrocuted him. That will not solve your problems. That man deserves to die. I spat out the words with as much bile as I could muster. Then I fell back into the middle seat, suddenly exhausted. My heart felt like it was going to explode out of my chest. I took some deep breaths in an attempt to calm myself. The boy stood motionless, staring at the falling rain. You know it never gets easier, he finally muttered. After all these years of helping people cross over, it still remains difficult to let go sometimes. Some deaths are so much more deserving than others. I should not judge anyone. Yet I cannot help but feel for some of them. Occasionally, the ones I meet radiate such light that it pains me to extinguish it. I don't always want to, but I have no choice. My existence is one of duty. The boy radiated an eerie calmness as he spoke. I felt my heartbeat returning to normal. Who are you? How do you know these things? The boy gave me a sad smile. I guess I am a traveler. Everyone will meet me at some point in their lives. Whether it is in the beginning or the end or somewhere in between. I don't understand. The boy shrugged. I wouldn't expect you to. The boy looked at his watch. The bus should be here any minute. As soon as he'd spoken the words, two lights cut through the inky darkness. The bus stopped before us and the doors slipped open. The boy climbed up the little staircase. Once he got to the top, he spun around. I've never done this before, but will you take a short journey with me, John? Where are we going? The boy shrugged. I'm not sure yet. All I know is that you should join me for this. I hesitantly looked at the boy. There was something about him. I felt compelled to join him. I took the boy's hand and climbed up the stairs behind him as the doors closed. The bus driver was old. Very old. A shroud of matted white hair draped around his shoulders. Icy blue eyes stared at us. I instinctively pulled out my wallet and passed him some cash. The boy laughed and held back my hand. I'm afraid that won't work. I don't have anything else. The boy tapped my wristwatch. Show him that. I stuck out my arm towards the driver. He stared at it before also tapping the watch a couple of times and inspecting the unmoving dials. Seemingly satisfied, he waved us inside. The boy hurried towards the back of the deserted bus and waved me over. I sat quietly beside him. "Where are we going?" The boy grinned. "This journey is not about a destination, per se." "Then what is it about?" "It's about everything," the boy exclaimed. "And also about nothing." The boy must have recognized the exasperation on my face. He cleared his throat. "You should consider yourself lucky, John." I laughed humorlessly. "I should consider myself lucky. Lucky that my daughter is dead? Lucky that my wife can barely stand to look at me? Lucky that my other child had barely spoken in weeks?" The boy's eyes grew hard. Having someone you love ripped away before their time is difficult. "I understand that." "Do you really?" I muttered sarcastically. "More than you could possibly imagine," the boy replied coolly. "I have guided many people before their time. I have comforted both young and old, held the hands of bother murderers and the murdered. I have held newborn babies and taken children from their parents' embrace. I have walked the fields of countless battles. I have waded through rivers of blood. Wherever I go, the dead follow, like moths attracted to a flame. You could not comprehend the endless sorrow I must navigate." He wiped a single tear from his eye. Within them, I saw only grief, as if his words had opened an old wound. I felt sorry for him. "Sometimes I feel so far away from everything," the boy continued. "I worry I have become too indifferent. I fulfill my duty without truly understanding what it is I should be doing. I feel like a spectator watching eternity unfold itself. I offer hope to those I meet whenever I can without knowing whether my words are true or not. I have no idea what comes after this, John. I wish I knew. I wish I understood my purpose. My life is a paradox. My existence is perennial and yet one of insufferable solitude. You must feel lonely." The boy nodded. After that, we sat together in silence. The boy stared out the window. He seemed deep in thought. I felt my eyelids grow heavy, and before long, I had fallen asleep. I woke up disoriented. The bus was deserted, and for a moment I thought I'd dreamed my encounter with the boy. Then the bus driver turned around. His blue eyes pierced through me, and he pointed towards the little hill we were parked beside. "He is waiting." With a quick nod, I jumped off the bus. I reached the top of the little hill panting. The boy leaned against a tree and observed the spectacle unraveling itself below. A small crowd had fathered before a tiny grave. A priest stood reading from the Bible. His actions seemed almost mechanical in their repetition. "Why are we here?" The boy remained silent. "Whose funeral is this?" The boy nodded at the crowd down below. "You know whose funeral this is." I quickly scanned the crowd, only recognizing familiar faces. "Is this my funeral? Is that what this is about? Are you showing me what will happen if I murder Mara's killer?" "You know," the boy repeated. His voice was a mere whisper. I looked at the people occupying the front row of chairs. My family was nowhere to be seen. My youngest daughter's godparents sat before the pitiful hole in the ground. They held each other as they cried. My knees suddenly felt weak. Slowly, I slid to the floor as tears soaked the earth around me. Where am I? Jail. A simple, yet sober reply. Where's my wife? The boy's eyes remained pricked on the little crowd below as he scratched the back of his head. She is not here, John. Where is she? I sobbed so hard the words left in a single slur. Your wife found her. After you were taken away, the little girl could not cope anymore and hung herself in Mara's room. Your wife was unable to handle the strain and had a breakdown. She is currently forcibly restrained in an asylum 2 hours away. Next week she will suffer a stroke. The boy glanced at me. His eyes were riddled with pity. She will never recover. Slowly her will to live will siphon away until only the smallest amount lies dormant in her heart. She will be trapped in her body, a mere husk of her former self, wanting to die yet unable to do so. I would not wish such an existence upon anyone. My tears had subsided for something worse. A feeling I can hardly put into words. A feeling of loneliness so immense I could barely breathe. I felt like I was being crushed by infinite grief. The boy smiled sadly. Do you see how cruel destiny is, John? By all accounts, your actions will be directly to blame for this. One moment of rage will destroy everyone you care about the most. What you seek is justice. What you offer is condemnation. A searing anger took hold of me. Why are you torturing me like this? The boy shook his head but offered no reply. I wanted to leave. I wanted to run away and never look back, but I couldn't find the strength to get on my feet. Instead, I dropped my head in my hands. I thought I had more time. The boy smirked. Everybody always thinks they have more time. I wish I could have told her how proud I was. The boy placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. She knew. I patted his hand, unable to respond. Together we stood on the little hill in silence. The minutes crept by. Why did you really come to me? The boy scratched the back of his head and looked at me. He seemed to be deliberating with himself. I've always believed myself to be bound by laws I have no control over. Laws I don't quite understand. To my surprise, the boy suddenly chuckled. But lately, I met someone so outrageous, they dared to challenge my path. Can you imagine? My speck of dust challenging the full might of the inevitable. The boy fell silent for a moment. Then he continued. She made me wonder whether I too can challenge what seems inevitable. Maybe the constraints that bind me are self-imposed. Maybe I fear the freedom disobedience would grant me. The boy smirked. I live for those moments. Reminders of how exceptional life can be. She made me realize something, John. If she managed to find the strength to confront me, then maybe someone as lost as myself, bound by eternity, might possess the power to break free. I don't understand. Sometimes when people die, their gaze manages to pierce through time and they get a glimpse of what is to come. Your daughter saw all of this. He pointed at the crowd below. Then the boy smiled more genuinely. Mara was exceptionally stubborn when I met her. She absolutely refused to come with me. She refused to submit to her fate as few have done before her. The thought brought a smile to my face. Do you know why she refused to come with me, John? Out of anger. The boy shook his head. Out of love. Her love for you. For her mother. For her sister. Her love was strong enough to challenge forces even I dared not resist. I was in awe of her, John. That's why I promised her to show you this. She truly was a kind child. Silent tears rolled down my face, but their sting was less painful than before. The boy grabbed my hands and gently pulled me back to my feet. In time you will see her again. She will be waiting for you. For all of you. But she hoped she would still be waiting a while longer. Do you understand? I did not have the strength to answer. All I could do was give the boy a weak nod. Together we walked back to the bus and took our familiar seats in the back. Thank you, I said after a moment. Thank you for taking care of Mara. Thank you for helping me. The boy looked taken aback. Wherever I go, people usually fear me. They recoil at my touch, even if I only mean to help. I have always been hated because I am a reminder of the inevitable. Never before has someone thanked me. His words carried such emotion. I tentatively put my arm around the child's shoulder. The boy gazed up at me. Tears slowly formed in his eyes. He leaned into me and cried. I let him. Before long, I fell into a deep sleep. When I awoke, we were back at the bus stop. The boy accompanied me to the front where the doors slid open. I walked down the little stairs. The moment my feet hit the pavement, the dials on my watch began to move once more. This is where we part, the boy said from inside the bus. I looked at him sheepishly. My mouth opened, but no words came out. I did not know what to say. Where will you go from here? The boy shrugged. I never know. Are you dead? I suddenly blurted. The boy grinned as the doors slowly slid closed. I sat at the bus stop long after the bus had disappeared. Then I walked back towards my car. On the bridge, I took the gun from my pocket and swung it into the river. I was ready to go home. Doorbell camera. Before I start the story, I should probably give context so you can fully understand the layout of my friend's house and why I was staying there. At this time, I was in the Navy and was about to leave for deployment. I had just moved out of my apartment and moved my things into storage. My friends were kind enough to make arrangements for me to stay with them before we headed out to sea. Their house was on a corner at the entrance of the neighborhood. It was on a busy street with a gas station directly across the house. The driveway was right off of the busy street, but the front door faced away from the road. You actually couldn't see it unless you took a path that would wind around a large tree and a few bushes. Basically, it was tucked away, and sometimes delivery drivers would need help finding it if we ordered pizza or something. This is important because at night, it's especially hard to find. There was a camera in the garage and another at the front door. My friend Jay and I had started a routine where we sat on the couch, drank wine, and watched true crime. It was our way of winding down from the day. This particular night was one of those nights. Jay and I were sitting on the couch when we heard the Ring doorbell go off. Jay and I looked at each other a little puzzled because it was very late. That's weird. Did you order food or something? I asked Jay. No, did you? She asked me as she opened up her phone to look at the app to see who was out front. I began to walk over to the door and see if it was our neighbors or someone who might need help. Don't open the door, Jay said. I could hear the fear in her voice. I turned, looking at her concerned and a bit confused. I walked over to Jay and looked over her shoulder at her phone to see what was scaring her. My stomach dropped. A large man was standing at our front door, completely still. He was wearing a mask and holding what looked like a child's backpack that appeared to be dirty and stained. What are you doing? Jay asked through the screen. The man held up the backpack and opened it slightly. He tilted it, trying to show us what was in the bag, but we couldn't see. If you have a Ring camera, then you probably know that sometimes the quality can be crap. But a glare made it seem like something shiny was in the bag, yet the man never pulled it out. He then got close to the camera and just stared into it. It was creepy. He stayed there still, just staring. His eyes were dead and looked sinister. It was terrifying. "I'm calling the cops," I yelled. I grabbed my keys and also made my car alarm go off to scare the man away and bring attention to anyone nearby. It seemed to work because the man slowly walked away. I called 911 as Jay monitored the cameras for any sign of the man. Once I got off the phone with dispatch, Jay showed me something even more terrifying. The cameras caught footage of the man sneaking around the outside of the house prior to him ringing the doorbell. He was trying to understand the layout of our house. The footage also showed him pressing his back against the side of the house and looking around the corner a few times as if he was making sure no one was around to see what he was doing. It was then that I made the connection: he was planning to hurt us with whatever was in that bag. The cops came and we gave our statements and the footage from the doorbell camera. They let us know they would keep an eye out for the man and let us know of any updates. But the story doesn't end here. A few weeks passed since the incident with the man. I had pretty much forgotten about the whole thing until I got a call. A police officer reached out to me and asked me to sit down because she had an update about the weird man. Approximately 12 minutes before the man came to our house, he had broken into an elderly woman's home. He stood in her bedroom and watched her sleep until the woman woke up and saw him. She screamed and he stabbed her 6 to 7 times before fleeing. The man thought he killed the elderly lady, but luckily she lived. The only reason we know it was the same man was because the elderly woman also had a doorbell camera showing the same man with the same mask and child's backpack. Remember the stains I said were on the bag? It turns out that was the woman's blood. The footage we gave the cops was used in a trial and the man was put in jail from what I've heard. I'm really thankful Jade stopped me from opening the door that night. Who knows what would have happened if I opened it? And thank God for doorbell cameras. Dinner with the neighbor. During the summer, I turned 22, my boyfriend and I moved into our first apartment together. It was a smaller building, about 12 units, and had an eclectic mix of tenants. Everyone was kind and always happy to exchange small talk if we crossed paths in the hallway or parking lot. My boyfriend, being more social than I, quickly got to know the names and units that belonged to everyone. Being a young man, he was often asked to help move furniture or carry in groceries for some of the older residents. One woman in particular, Lisa, was especially talkative and seemed to find any excuse to have my boyfriend and I come over to help her around the house. Having grandparents of our own, we knew that she most likely wanted company other than her orange cat, so we would always find the time to take out her trash or carry bags of cat litter up the stairs for her. One day in early July, we ran into Lisa while we were coming home from the beach. I was unloading the car, my head in the back seat trying to gather the items that had spilled from the beach bag onto the floor of the car when I heard Lisa's voice behind me. "Hello, Jess. Hot weather we're having today, isn't it?" I jumped when I heard her. I never understood how this 85-year-old woman could be so silent. "Oh, hi there, Lisa." Yeah, it was a scorcher. I pulled my head out of the car and turned to look at her. Despite the hot weather, Lisa was wearing a pair of jeans, a slipper, a turtleneck, and a wool sweater. Oddly enough, she wasn't sweating. "I hope I'm not bothering you. I saw you and Jim from my window and wanted to invite you both over for dinner tonight. My brother is coming over today, so I'm making something special. Since you two are always so helpful, I wanted to invite you as well." I hesitated to answer. Lisa had never invited us to eat with her before, nor had she ever mentioned a brother. Also, and at the time I thought I was imagining it, something seemed to be off about her. She was several inches shorter than me and usually looked up at me and made eye contact when she talked. This time, she was standing several feet away and staring at what seemed to me the tail light 2 feet to my side. At the time, I brushed it off as exhaustion from the heat. It was 90 degrees after all, and she did appear to be wearing far too much clothing for the weather. Just as I was about to decline the offer, something in my gut telling me tonight would be a night to stay in, my boyfriend walked outside. "Hi Lisa, how has your day been?" Jim said in his usual friendly tone. "I hope I'm not bothering you. I saw you and Jim from my window and wanted to invite you both over for dinner tonight. My brother is coming over today, so I'm making something special. Since you two are always so helpful, I wanted to invite you as well," Lisa said, repeating exactly what she had just said to me, never breaking that gaze from the tail light. "Of course we will. We would love to meet your brother and try your cooking. Jim. Always the social butterfly. It was something I loved about him when we met, but there were times when it could really get on my nerves." "Wonderful," Lisa said. Her face broke out in a smile, but her eyes were still locked in that unnerving stare. "I will see you at 8 o'clock. My brother will be getting in late, so we'll have to have a late dinner." Before we could respond, she did a swift about face and marched back into the building. My boyfriend and I stared at each other with puzzled looks on our faces. "She seems off. Are you sure we should go? Maybe she needs to rest?" I said, trying my best to find an excuse not to attend. "It is probably just the heat. You know how old people get. She's also probably a bit stressed from her brother visiting. I didn't even know she had one, so it must be a big deal." Jim replied, "We have to go. She's expecting us and we don't want to be rude. We seem to be the only people she talks to in the building." I guess you're right. My stomach was doing a backflip at the thought of sitting through what I expected to be an awkward evening. I never liked dinner parties anyway, but this one was giving me a weird feeling. We unloaded the car and I brushed my anxiety off as a bit of heat mixed with a little too much alcohol while at the beach. Once inside, I jumped into a cold shower to cool off, clean the sand, and surf off. Jim and I napped for about an hour, and at 8 o'clock we put our shoes on and headed upstairs to Lisa's apartment. Jim reached up and knocked on the door. That weird feeling had returned and I found myself holding my breath, hoping that for some reason Lisa and her brother would fail to open that door. The doorknob turned and Lisa, still dressed in her unseasonably warm clothing. "Come in. My brother just got here. Take a seat in the living room." We shuffled our way into the apartment, and as we were taking off our shoes, a smell hit my nose like none I'd never experienced before. It was a mix of rotten meat and mildew, exasperated by the heat of July. I gagged and shot a look of confusion and concern at my boyfriend. He nodded and whispered into my ear, "It's probably just a cat box and an old trash bag. You know how this building gets in the summer with no AC." "I guess you're right," I mumbled back. Jim always gave people the benefit of the doubt. He really was just too nice and unassuming sometimes. With a knot forming in my stomach, Jim and I proceeded into the living room. Fully expecting to see an unbathed, elderly man sitting on Lisa's couch, I was not prepared for what I saw when we turned the corner. No one was there. The only living thing in that apartment other than Lisa was her large orange cat sitting on the armchair. "Lisa, Jim, this is my brother Daryl," Lisa said with a gesture toward the cat. I squeezed Jim's hand and tried my best to maintain a smile on my face. Jim looked at me. This time a look of terror and confusion was on his face. I mouthed the words. Not a single fan was blowing or a window open. "Lisa, would you like me to open a window for you? It's really stuffy with all these people in here," Jim asked. "No. The bugs will get out if you open the window," Lisa said. She had that far-off gaze on her face again. This time she was staring just past Jim and I at the wall where her photographs were hanging. Jim and I both wrote off the slip as part of whatever was going on with her. Jim mouthed the word stroke at me and I nodded in agreement. "Lisa, are you sure you are feeling all right? I think we should call the doctor. I think the heat might be getting to you," I said as gently as possible, not wanting to upset her, potentially making matters worse. "I'm just fine, Jess. Daryl asked me the same thing earlier. I must just be a little tired from the heat. Isn't that right, Daryl?" As Lisa said this, her gaze remained steady on the wall at the back of the room. She didn't have many lights on, just one lamp in the corner. It was hard to tell, but it looked as though her pupils were so dilated that the blue irises were completely covered by the black of her pupils. There was no response from Daryl, as he wasn't there. Just a swish of the tail from her orange cat. "It's just finished and ready to serve." Lisa turned around and walked into the kitchen. Jim and I were both starting to get really unnerved by the whole situation. We thought it was obvious that she was having a stroke, but other than talking to someone who wasn't there and wearing a sweater in the grueling heat, her motor skills and speech were perfectly normal for a woman in her mid-80s. "Jim, I don't think she's having a stroke. I think something else is going on," I said to my boyfriend as soon as she left. "We'll give it a few more minutes. If she doesn't start acting normal by the end of dinner, we'll call an ambulance," Jim whispered to me as we walked to the kitchen. The smell from when we first entered the apartment was suffocating as I got hotter and more uncomfortable. I was dizzy from breathing shallowly through my mouth and the back of my neck was covered in sweat. When we walked into the kitchen, the table was set for 4. Not surprising after what just occurred in the living room. Jim and I took our seats at the table. The smell was worse now in the kitchen than it had been before. She must really be behind on the cat box and trash, I thought to myself. The glass at the table was already filled with water. I picked it up to take a sip, but immediately stopped when the cup reached my mouth. The cup was warm from the heat and a sour, vinegar smell filled my mouth as I opened it to take a sip. I quickly set my glass down on the table, kicked Jim's leg under the table, and gestured toward the water with a disturbed look on my face. Jim picked up his glass and smelled it, and I thought he was going to vomit right then and there. The look on his face was one of pure disgust. At this point, Lisa had her back to us and was preparing her dishes on the counter. Suddenly, I became very concerned about dinner. If something was wrong with the water, what was the food going to be like? I waited. Jim and I said nothing, just stared at each other across the tiny kitchen table with looks of anxiety on our faces. Lisa's cat jumped up into the chair next to mine and let out a low meow. His tail was flicking. "Here's dinner. I made it especially for you, Daryl. I know it's your favorite." Lisa turned around and was carrying a large roasting pan. She set it down in the center of the table. I reached out to help her avoid spilling steaming hot food all over, but realized that the pan was the same temperature as the room. It wasn't hot at all, even though she had just pulled it out of her oven. Lisa sat down in the chair, took off the lid of the roasting pan, and I was met with the source of that terrible smell. Inside the pan was a pot roast with carrots, potatoes, and gravy, but it was all covered in mold. I gasped and froze at the sight of it. "Your favorite, right, Daryl?" Lisa said again as she reached for the label and scooped 2 large helpings onto the plate in front of her cat. I watched in horror as she then turned to me and did the same. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe, knowing now where that smell had been coming from. I felt Jim kick my leg. Our eyes locked. Lisa continued serving the rotten roast to Jim and finally to herself. I stared at my plate. In the dim light and heat of Lisa's apartment, I made out tiny white maggots, hundreds of them, crawling out from between the layers of meat and vegetables. The meat had turned green and the vegetables were slimy. I shut my eyes and covered my mouth and nose with my one hand. It was all I could do to keep from throwing up. Something was very wrong with Lisa. My eyes shot back open when I heard a clatter. Jim had practically fallen out of his chair and was scrambling towards the door. "Jess, we're going now," she said in a stern and terrified voice. I opened my eyes and bolted up from my chair. I felt Jim grab my hand as he said, "Don't look, just go." My body did exactly the opposite. As we grabbed our shoes and wrenched the door open, I took a quick look behind me, something to this day I wish with all my heart I hadn't done. When I looked back, I saw Lisa's cat, with its face to the plate, devouring the dish in front of him. But even more disturbing was Lisa, sitting here chewing away on the maggot-infested roast, a smile on her face as she looked at the cat and said, "I know, Daryl, it's my favorite too," before shoveling a heaping fork full of the putrid meat into her mouth. Jim and I ran upstairs and spent the next half hour puking. After that, we couldn't eat for 2 weeks, and I ended up throwing out the clothes we had worn into the apartment because no matter how much we washed them, I couldn't seem to get the smell out. That evening, once we had stopped vomiting and were able to be calm enough to talk, Jim called emergency services and told them what had happened. He said that our neighbor was unwell and they should send an ambulance as well and someone from social services to check on the elderly woman. A couple of days later, we received news that Lisa had been taken to the emergency room that night for evaluation and died soon after in the hospital. Her funeral was being held the following weekend, and we were encouraged to attend as she didn't have much family left. On the day of the funeral, Jim and I were still unable to eat. We had been living on coffee, water, and saltine crackers since the night we went for dinner. We had scrubbed every inch of the house, opened the windows, and had 3 scented candles burning almost constantly. We mustered the courage out of respect for our neighbor and headed to the memorial service. We walked into the mostly empty room at the funeral home to pay our respects. Looking at the face of Lisa as she lay there in her coffin, I couldn't help but wonder what happened to her. Why had such a kind old lady gone so far off the deep end so suddenly? Had her brother Daryl recently died and maybe she couldn't handle the grief? Had it been a stroke? We were never given an answer from anyone on what actually happened. But we did learn one thing at the memorial service. While reading through her obituary, I noticed that there was no Daryl listed at all in Lisa's family. In fact, she only had one sister who had died of breast cancer in her 50s, 30 years prior to this. I mentioned this to Jim on the way home, and all we could agree on was that it was best to not think about it. We moved a few months later. The apartment had been wonderful, but there was no way we could stay in the building after what had happened. Jim and I are still together, and he is just as social with the neighbors, but now we pay closer attention to the elderly people that live in our building.